The Process Podcast, breaking down the daily habits, processes, and tools of high achievers. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilson.
Hey there, boys and girls. This is Brad Wilson with the Process Podcast. As always, if you haven't yet subscribed to the show, please take a second and click that shiny, beautiful little subscribe button. It would genuinely mean the world to me. And if you would like to stay updated to all of the things that I create, you can head to mentallyinvincible.com/theprocess and join my email newsletter. On today's show, I have with me Jeff Emtman. Jeff's the creator of the critically acclaimed Here Be Monsters podcast, which is an immersive storytelling experience that dives deeply into our fears, beliefs, and the human experience. One of the many ways that I have great respect and much jealousy for Jeff is his ability to create a three-dimensional atmosphere within an audio format that is just world-class. And when you listen to his show, the world kind of dissolves and fades away. And then when the show ends, there's this movie credits like snap back to reality that has always held a very special place in my heart. In our conversation, we discuss how to sharpen and improve your storytelling abilities, how photography greatly influences Jeff's storytelling in a purely audio format, the overwhelming power of belief and how it shapes the world around us, and much more. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jeff Emtman. Jeff, good morning, my friend. How are we doing, sir?
Doing great.
Tell me about dealing with failure, dealing with rejection.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think about rejection all the time. Aside from more basic, like personal forms of rejection, I was, I don't think I talked about this with you before. I went on a hitchhiking trip when I was about 22, and I got from Washington State down to Mississippi and back over the course of a summer. And, you know, that was like the first time that I was dealing with constant rejection, you know, because you're like standing there on the on-ramp and you want this thing from people. You want something they have, you know, they have it because they have a car, you know. It's not like you're asking for money, you know, and you're asking for this thing that you know they have, and maybe they're not going to the place that you've written on your sign, or maybe they're in a rush, or maybe they don't trust you, you know. And then there's that like takes out a large portion of the people that might be able to give you a ride. And then there's also people who for a variety of reasons, and understandably so, just don't want to help you when they can. And you know that. You might not know which percentage of people it is, but you know that it's a large percentage of people. And you just have to deal with it, you know, because it's like you make eye contact with, you know, however many hundred people, and then on the like 400th time, like someone pulls over and takes you where you need to go. Yeah, and so that was when I was 22, I think. I think I was 22 back then. That was like the first time that I was ever dealing with just like constant rejection. And it really shifted the way that I thought about rejection. And in so much that just like it happened so many times that I was able to get over some weird humps that I had about it.
Why did you hitchhike across the country at the age of 22?
Oh, there's a lot of I've told myself so many false stories about that it's hard for me to remember what my actual thinking back then was. It was some combination of I was a photographer back then. I was trying to get away from the clusters of other photographers and see things and take photos of things that weren't being huddled around in the cities that I was living in. You know, I was curious to see if it was still possible to hitchhike, because people always talk about that being a thing of the past. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to do something that felt scary to me, partially as like a form of like antagonism, you know, to antagonize people who cared about me, which isn't my favorite trait about myself by any means. But part of it also to challenge myself to to not always exist in like a really safe environment, because I was feeling, even at age 22, I was feeling I was getting complacent and too used to living in utter safety, and I thought that was going to wreck my brain. Some combination of all those things.
Did you have any moments during that journey through the summer that were especially scary? Because I imagine hitchhiking myself, and it's not just from the motorist perspective. From my perspective, you're scared of inviting somebody into your space that you know nothing about. And I think from your perspective, there could be predatory motorists that pick you up that maybe wish you ill will. Was that something that you thought about? Did you ever have a time where you just spent? What's the longest you went without somebody picking you up?
I was trying to get a ride out of was it Nashville? I think it was Nashville. Is Nashville does Nashville border Mississippi?
Memphis.
Memphis. It was Memphis. Yeah. I was in Memphis in a rainstorm, and I spent the whole day there. I woke up there, and then around 5 in the evening, 6 in the evening, I realized no one was going to pick me up. And so I actually called a friend of mine who lived in Mississippi, and I was like, "Hey, I thought I was going to be able to come see you today, and it turns out that I'm not getting a ride." And he was like, "You know what? I'm off work. Like, let me just drive up there." And so he drove about an hour and a half to come snag me. Aside from that, I think the longest I waited was maybe 3 or 4 hours.
That's actually not that bad, 3 or 4 hours. I would have thought it would be much worse. When you were not hitchhiking, I mean, you were staying in hotels. How did you fund this endeavor?
Actually, I was sleeping outside. It was summer.
Oh, wow. Where did you sleep?
Well, I left my college town, which is Bellingham, Washington. I left there with a friend of mine who wanted to go visit her grandma. So those first couple nights, actually, it didn't take us very long to get there. We slept the first night in Spokane, Washington, in a park, and then the next day it was just one ride, or it was a couple rides. But we wound up in Missoula that night, and she had friends who lived in Missoula, so we stayed there. And then we got to Helena in another day, which is where her grandma lived. And so that didn't actually take very long, but that was like when I was traveling with a friend. And so she got to her grandma, and she was like, "Great, I'm with my grandma now. I'm set." And so I was like, "Great, I'm gonna keep going." And so I remember that first day we were at Yellowstone. We got down to Yellowstone, and that's where I separated ways with them. And the first person who picked me up was this woman in a Jaguar who was driving cross country and was bored. And she was like, "You can ride with me as far east as you want." And I was like, "Great, let's just see where we wind up." And so that night we wound up in Nebraska, and she was sleeping in a hotel, and I was like, "Great, I'll find somewhere to sleep." And so, yeah, that night I just hiked up excuse me. We weren't in Nebraska. We were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And she found a hotel, and I hiked up a hill, a ski hill that was abandoned because it was summer, hiked up the ski hill, and I found this tent full of folding tables that was used for events. And I just made a little space in between the two piles of tables, and I slept in between them. And it was terrifying. It was so scary. I was sure I was going to get mauled by a bear.
Why were you sure that you were going to get mauled by a bear?
Because there were signs everywhere that's like, I feel like there were signs that said, like, put your stuff in a bear cache. Or if there weren't signs, like, I invented them in my mind. You're out away from people. Like, if you're in trouble, like, what are you going to do? You're going to yell and no one's going to hear you. I'd never camped outside by myself before. That was the first time. I barely slept.
Wow. That was the first time you camped outside by yourself,
Yeah.
all by yourself. And did you have a cell phone? Did you have a means of communication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
Do you still feel that need to get out of complacency and feel unsafe?
I do. I don't act on it as much as I wish I did. like I mean, this is classic. This isn't unusual, but it's like in youth, a lot of people feel like they have something to prove, and I certainly felt that way. My forms of rebellion were weird, but they weren't anything special in that regard. And I think the difference might be is like, as I've gotten older, people always complain about getting older, but like as I've gotten older, I've gotten happier with who I am. And so it feels like there's more to lose, you know? That's kind of a weird thing though, because it seems like society tells us it's the opposite way. It seems like society tells us that, it's like, you're young, you have like all this potential, and like all this sort of thing. It's like your life is very valuable. And that, don't get me wrong here. I don't think that's inaccurate. I just think it seems riskier to me now because I feel like I'm actually kind of partially happy with who I am now.
So there's much more to lose
A little bit.
Because of how you feel.
A little bit. I know a lot of people who thought their 20s were miserable. I don't think mine were miserable. I just think that there's a lot of anxiety you have when you have no idea where you're going in your life. And like when I was 22 and hitchhiking, I had no idea where I was going in my life.
Yeah. It's the difference in writing a story versus editing a story, looking at a blank page versus improving what's already written. When you're looking at a blank page, and in my 20s, I felt a lot of uncertainty. And in my 20s especially, I was just really dumb, just very foolish, much more foolish than I would have wished. And life now as a 34-year-old adult is way more fulfilling, way happier, way better than my 20s. So I don't know if it's uncommon, but we certainly have that in common. Let's talk about the photography.
Yeah.
Because that was, your journey across the country. That was something that you were focusing on. Tell me the role that photography's played in your life and, how it led to expressing yourself creatively.
Yeah. I mean, I went to school. I was trying to be a photographer back then. Mostly I was trying to be a photographer. And I was using photography, and I think the way a lot of people use it, like kind of as a crutch at first, when you feel socially awkward. Photography is really nice because it lets you participate in social events without actually participating in social events, And it's a way of making people want you to be there, at least not all the time, but like especially if you're going to like house shows and stuff like that. Like people want you to be there because they want you to like document their youth and make them look good and make them look like they're good at playing music and popular and interesting and all these things. I was doing music photography a lot back then. It was my way of like participating without actually participating. And then I started getting a lot more interested in portraiture, taking pictures of people, usually like these really wide angle shots of like people in places, right? Like I always wanted there to be the context of the place there. And I would do a lot of these photos kind of after the sun had gone down and before the sun had come up. I was doing a thing for a while where I was like taking pictures of where people had just been standing, like not actually with any people in the shots, but like right after someone had left, because I was trying to figure out if you could charge a scene by having a person having just been there, It's kind of a question more of like soul or like what remains after the person is there, or in a more practical sense, like footprints, you know what I mean? If someone's shoes are wet or if there's snow on the ground. Yeah. Some of my favorite photos actually were, a couple times I went over to friends' houses in the morning and took pictures of their beds right after they'd gotten out of them. So you could see the like shape of them in the sheets, in the tangle of sheets. And so back then I was using photography like partly as this way to participate without participating, and also partly because one of my biggest fears is losing my mind, losing my memory. And I thought, well, if there's a point when I can't tell stories either through, Alzheimer's or getting hit by a car or, what have you. Like, I want there to be these physical remnants, so that people can understand where I was coming from. And that's what I was using photography for.
Why the interest in the soul? Why were you looking to see if, people's soul left an imprint in the photos?
I was, and still am, like, interested in the cult, the cult and the supernatural, which is a pretty wide swath from, religion to Ouija boards and aliens and things like that. And I was interested in the time at this type of photography that was taking place in New Age circles, which was, I can't remember the like brand names of this, but it's definitely like a brand name sort of thing, where you could go and you could use these devices that purported to capture your aura, right? And these machines are very expensive. Getting their images are very expensive because they're controlled by whatever company, and they claim to be able to like access the supernatural realm to understand your aura and give you these like colors, and you're just supposed to keep going in because of course your aura can change a little bit over time, and it's supposed to go in for like your weekly aura photo and have someone interpret it for you and tell you what it means, that sort of thing, where it's like the interesting thing is, of course, there's like science to this too, because it is a real picture. And I don't actually know how it works, but I do know that, we think of our body kind of ending at our skin, right? But it actually doesn't, because like you can pick up brain waves from someone like through their skull or even a tiny bit further away. Of course, they're not good signals, but our body, has elements of it that extend past us, our breath as it leaves our body. Other things too, sounds that we make, the body doesn't truly end at the skin. There's elements of us that move further.
Well, there's 100% the electromagnetic brain and I've experienced this in my life. And, when you meet people and you get an intuition about who they are, about whether they're happy, sad, angry, how they're feeling, it's scientifically proven that these things, we can pick up on these things from human beings that are around us. I've gotten extremely bad feelings about people that I've just met. And you think of it as intuition, but, scientifically there is something happening that you're processing and picking up on. And I think that when you go out in the world, you put your emotions out there. People can feel them.
What do you think it is?
From what I've read, just the electromagnetic pulse of the brain, putting it out there. That is effectively an aura of good, bad, whatever it is that people can pick up on.
So you think there's senses past the ones that we commonly recognize?
Absolutely. I've met people that I just know in my bones they're not great people. Just from first interaction, I can tell. It's just an intuitive thing.
But it's also something that you can't prove is right or wrong, right? Because it's not like there's like an index that you can go and look that person up in and confirm or deny. It's like you have to judge it based on these actions, which are kind of secondary,
I would have to create a scale of good and evil, and then mark all their behaviors down on one side and tally marks. Now, okay, this guy is effectively evil, so it's a really hard thing to prove, but I do believe it.
Yeah, it's difficult, when you deal with a secondary phenomenon to tell how good your science is, right? Because there's a lot of my work that is interested in belief, right? And I used to be really overly focused on what was true, right? Like what is true with a capital T, true. And it took me a couple of years to figure out that what is true is actually usually less interesting and less important than what people believe is true, right? So like if you live your life, say, believing that the Christian God is real and present and active and takes care of you and will punish you if you're bad to the God or to other people or what have you. Like whether or not that God is real is actually probably less interesting and important to the world than whether people believe it's real. And you can tell more, like, by focusing your energies on what people believe. I think you can have a better understanding of the world than you would if you knew all the details of the afterlife or lack thereof. That's what the podcast is about.
Yeah.
It's like, let's look at what people believe.
And what are some interesting things that you found about the beliefs of people and how it shapes their actions and who they are, and what have you learned?
Well, I mean, we actually talked about this a little bit before, except it was you saying it, not me. I think that most people believe that they're acting morally, even when they're doing things that seem repugnant. Like, the concept of quote unquote tough love is something that people actually believe. How deeply, like how sincerely they believe that, or how much they believe that out of convenience is debatable. But like, a lot of these things that we look at in hindsight as really cruel, from history or even in the modern day, people find moral justifications for and think they're doing good in the world, right? And that's both really reassuring and really concerning, because there are very few of these like people who in rejoice in their evilness, that movie villain type. People I grew up with and people who I care about went on to be like Wall Street people, who believe that if we only all just like invested our money in Apple and coal futures, that the world would be a better place. It's ridiculous, but they believe that, and they think that they're doing good in the world by enriching themselves because they believe in like trickle down economics. Probably not how the world works. Like, we have good evidence against that. But again, you're not going to, by running around and telling people that you know the truth, or by even like, it doesn't seem to have the effect that I think, like having a direct line to the truth wouldn't, I think, fix all of the problems like in the world. I think it has to be a combination of that and focusing on how people believe things, because belief is just intensely powerful. It is, I think, much more important than fact in determining what happens in the world and what doesn't happen.
And how does understanding people's beliefs, how will that change the problems that are in the world? And how do we actively try to understand the people that we interact with's beliefs?
I don't want to claim that I have any sort of miracle cure for the world, because I really don't think I do. I've focused mostly in my work on understanding those beliefs and hearing those beliefs, and I'm hoping that I just wake up someday when I'm 50 and understand, that golden solution that doesn't actually exist, to fix the world. But with that being said, one thing that I've noticed in the last 6 years of doing this show has been that this idea that most people want to be good, think they are good. If you give people opportunities to be good, most of the time, I think they will. And I think that a lot of the perceived bad behavior that we see in the world comes from people feeling voiceless or useless, or as if other people think they're stupid. I've noticed that sometimes, like, you probably know this. You probably have met people who really want to like get in a shouting match about their beliefs with someone else. You know what I mean? And I've seen limited amounts of success by, like, when I encounter people like that, by just first hearing them out, because I think some people do provocative things as kind of like a cry for help, or like a way of justifying some terrible belief that they have that they themselves might have questions about. And when you encounter the people on the street who tell you you're going to hell, who really want to tell you that. I found that, like, by offering someone just a little bit of compassion, you can make some different progress. This actually does tie back into hitchhiking, Okay, so a little bit less abstract example, right? One thing that I noticed when I was hitchhiking is that because I was being so frugal, I wasn't poor, and there's like a very valid critique of what I did as like essentially like poverty role play, right? And that's something that I don't have a very good answer for. I think it's a pretty valid critique of what I was doing, because I wasn't rich, but like I was not too poor to afford a hotel room. I just really didn't want to. But I also had like a really, actually, it's up there somewhere. My hitchhiking backpack is up there. It's just like an old backpack from the 70s, like hiking backpack, and like I was really grubby and like sunburnt and like really well, actually I was like reasonably well shaven while I was traveling, because I thought that would make a difference, and I think it did. When you're walking around a city like looking grubby, though, people immediately assume that you're homeless, and that you're despondent, and a number of people actually wound up just handing me money, and I would like try to explain to them what I was doing and that I didn't actually need it, and they would still want me to have it. A number of people like invited me into their houses, like but the vast majority of people would kind of avert their eyes and look uncomfortable at me, as if they felt some kind of guilt, and I also noticed that other people who by appearances I would assume were people who didn't have houses would sometimes act in camaraderie with me and talk to me in ways that when I walk around the city now, I don't ever really have happen. And one of the things that was most, like, I felt so lonely during that time when I was traveling, because I was away from everyone I knew. Like, everyone I met, I had to give my like pitch to along the way. I had to be kind of like, I'm traveling America because like X, Y, and Z, and like put on that perky face so that people, wouldn't feel uncomfortable by me. It was incredibly isolating to have people very often not recognize my humanity, which was the first time in my life that had ever happened to me. You know what I mean? And like, I get really self-conscious when I walk by someone who's like sitting on the street who looks kind of grubby. I'm incredibly conscious of that now. And I try really hard to make eye contact with anyone who will let me, because that feeling of feeling invisible is really rough.
Is there anything else that you do besides the eye contact? Communicate with them, talk with them?
I'll talk with anyone who will let me talk to them. That's sometimes a virtue and sometimes a vice, if you ask my girlfriend. She does it too, so that's
just because you've been in that situation. So I think typically when we go through a situation, it's a lot easier for us to be compassionate for people who are currently in that situation. You know what I mean? So I was just wondering if there's anything specifically we can do to show our humanity, make them feel their humanity and not feel so isolated.
Well, just to tack on to that a little bit, it's like I felt this, right? And I am the member of, I think, literally every single privileged class you can think of, right? Like that extreme minority of people who like hit every single one of those circles, because even past the other ones, like I'm tall, like I'm not like massively disfigured in any way, like I had everything going for me essentially in these moments. And I still felt that. And like that like feeling of invisibility that like so many other people hit in a certain way, it's given me a lot of compassion for, it was like my first time like actually understanding how most people in the world live, even if it was just a tiny snippet of that, and even if it was just for 2 months, it just it allowed me to feel a little bit, it allowed me to, I don't know, I tried to take that moment, because in the moment it was rough, But I tried to just like section off a little corner of my brain where I could just like store all that stuff for later, because I don't want to feel that way all the time. And I don't feel that way hardly ever now, but I want to remember that there's this like really big danger in adopting that mindset that I mentioned earlier, which is like, oh, it's like poor people just need to invest in the stock market and put money in a savings account and stop buying cable and all these other things. They're just the sort of things that rich people say to make themselves feel better about being rich.
Do you think that experience, traveling and that whole experience, is something that humans should, regardless of their status, experience at some point in their life to better understand just how people live? Because I've never had that experience personally.
I don't, I see a lot of problems with the way that I was traveling. And I think that there are problems. Like, I think the more common example of this is like, we see the politician who wants to connect to the like quote unquote everyman, right? Who like goes and decides to be like homeless for a night and go undercover and like sleep at a shelter, It's like on paper that seems like kind of an okay idea, but in practice it's like kind of abusive or exploitative, to like glamorize this sort of thing. It's supposed to be like a humbling experience, but what am I trying to say here, Brad?
It's hard for a politician to do it in a day. Yeah. He still has tomorrow to look forward to.
Right, exactly. Because it's like if you have a way of bailing yourself out, that that's the thing, is that like it's easy to look at these experiences as being really authentic, when really there's like the only thing you should come away from that feeling is like suffering is bad, and I am lucky because I do not suffer on the level that most people do. You can't say like, look, I have encapsulated the experience of suffering in my 2 months of slight malnutrition and sunburntness and discomfort at sleeping underneath cars in the parking lot at a Dodge dealership, like sort of thing. I didn't sleep underneath. I slept in between them.
Well, again, even though that was your experience, you could have bailed yourself out, right? You had an escape hatch.
I had money. I think that's what I had. I had money and a cell phone. I had enough money to buy a plane ticket,
Right.
That's
and a support system. A support system that exactly. Welcomes you when you get off the plane.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like I don't want to represent that trip as like some sort of like way of making myself more authentic. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I know the ways of the road. It's like, no, I don't. I don't. What I know is I know what it looks like when someone like averts their eyes because they're scared of you.
Yeah.
Because they're scared of like the like smiling white guy on the side of the road, which is like, good. I don't know. Well, I guess I'm tall, I'm not physically imposing otherwise, I'm very thin, but like, I know what it looks like when someone averts their eyes because they don't want to think that there are people who they perceive to be poor in the world, or people they perceive to be suffering. Or
how did it feel when people averted their eyes from you? Like, how did it make you feel?
It got easier, with time, but it was still like, oh shit, like so much of the way people perceive me is based on these kind of quick judgments, because when you're on an on-ramp, you have about, it depends on the on-ramp, but somewhere between 1 and 3 seconds to make a call about whether or not you trust this person not to stab you. On the other end of it, on my end of it, I had the ability to like run up to the car, take a quick scan of what was inside, the person inside, ask them where they were going. And if where they were going was vague or seemed sketchy, I would turn them down, But once you're in the car, it's like you've kind of made the decision with that person. And I remember one time a guy picked me up in, I think it was Missouri, with his kid in the car. And I sat in the back seat. It was like a, oh my God, what's that called? Like a trooper? That's like a kind of like is that Jeep or an Isuzu thing? It's like I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I was sitting in the back seat of this like kind of pseudo Jeep SUV thing. It was covered, but like he was talking to me and we were like kind of exchanging life story, whatever. His son was up in front, and most of the time people wouldn't pick me up if there were kids in the car because I don't know, it's like fair enough, But I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, like I used to live in Hawaii, and like I was in a gang there, and I did something that they didn't like, and so me and him, talking to his kid, and it's like we just picked up and moved to Missouri overnight, And I was like, oh my, yeah, like I can't imagine doing that. And then I was like, I was like in the behind the driver's seat, I was just kind of resting my arm over the thing, and I was like, the whole time you've been telling me this, I've been kind of like absentmindedly like manipulating this little case, like just kind of just absentmindedly like touching this case, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking about it. I was like, what actually, this is a weird shape. What is this? And it was just totally a machete. It was just like the sheath of a machete in the back. I was like,
oh my God.
Ex-Hawaiian gangster, reformed. I mean, it's not like you get rid of your machete, I mean, and granted, it was also Missouri. Like there's a lot of valid uses for a machete if you live out in the sticks, But this guy just like upped and left his life, But he wasn't afraid of me. Another woman who picked me up.
Well, he had a machete. Well, actually, yeah. I guess you had the machete.
Well, I mean, but I was having this very pleasant conversation with this other person in Missouri. I spent a lot of time in Missouri that summer. I had this other very pleasant conversation with this woman. Like she was older. She was like, I went to the grocery store with her because she needed help getting like stuff from the top shelves. Like I think it's part of the reason she picked me up. It's because she wanted to go to the grocery store and get stuff off the shelf. So we ran around this grocery store while she did her grocery shopping. And then we got back in the car and she drove me a little bit further before her pull off. And like partway into the conversation, she was just like, yeah, I always pick up hitchhikers. I'm not really afraid of them or anything, even though like can't really walk that well. And I'm like older and stuff like that. And she's like, because I've always got like my Magnum right down here. And she just like kind of pointed to the like driver's side compartment where she just like kept a gun down there, I'm sure there are a ton of people that there was someone else I think who mentioned that they had a gun on them, like I'm sure that there were a lot of people that I rode with who only picked me up because they were armed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because they felt like they could
at least
they could
they probably
protect themselves.
Yeah. But at the same time, like I know a lot of people that picked me up didn't too, because they talked about how scared of me they were.
Why would they pick you up if they were scared of you?
I don't know. They're bored or they wanted to do the same thing I was doing, which was do something that made them feel really uncomfortable. Yeah, there's 1,000 reasons why people act in unpredictable ways,
Yeah.
I think it's something in our brains that evolution has coded in to like try out new ideas. Like maybe evolutionarily speaking, we were a hitchhiking species, something like that, right, Brad?
Okay, let's segue. Let's segue to the podcast itself.
Oh, yeah.
Which, Here Be Monsters, exploring your fears.
Mm-hmm.
I think hearing these stories, it makes a lot of sense to people that this specific podcast is something that you would have chosen to pursue. Can you tell me how the podcast came to be?
Yeah. I was graduating college and realized I didn't want to be a photographer. All the photographers I knew were miserable. So I was also starting to have issues with my eyes, my vision. And so I decided to make this show instead and try and take some of the stuff I'd learned as a photographer and apply it to audio form. And things I'm afraid of are numerous. So I decided to focus it on that.
A deep well of topics to explore.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about getting traction, developing your storytelling ability? When did you first get traction? When was the podcast? When did you first see the potential to be able to do this thing for a living?
Yeah, I was, I told you I graduated college and was feeling really lost, kind of on a whim. Well, I applied for some stuff and it didn't pan out. Kind of on a whim, I moved to Boulder, Colorado, not for great reasons. I thought there was a story I could do down there, just freelance and try and sell it to someone. And then very quickly that story fell through and I had relocated halfway across the country, And so I just started working jobs, worked in a pizza place, worked in a kite store, worked in a bakery, and was kind of miserable, actually. Just kind of I don't know. It was like the awfulness of having to restructure one's life after spending it all in education, and then realizing that was not in any way how the majority of people experience the world, and having to kind of learn how to actually talk to people like outside of the classroom was really difficult for me. And so I was spending a lot of time at home, and I was just kind of fiddling around with audio. I'd recorded this interview with the janitor at my college radio station. I just remember I spent hours and hours and hours just like poking around in an audio session, trying to make it sound the way he was describing things. And he would describe, he was a scuba diver, and he would describe like these underwater worlds that he experienced in this octopus that he met down there one time under a dock, and like getting his breath in concert with it. And I was just trying to make it sound like the way he was talking. And so I spent days and days and days just focused on this in my basement. So
let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure members of the audience are wondering, that was, they're thinking to themselves, that was the way he was talking. What do you mean by getting the audio the way he was talking?
Well, he said I was like, John, what's it sound like down there? No, what's it look like down there? I said, John, what's it look like down there? And he said, it's like, like an old television set when it's like the settings are wrong and it's kind of fuzzy and it's like everything is kind of green and blue and it's like an out of focus television set. It's like, okay, how do I make that sound? How do I make the sound of what the visual for that is?
How did you do that?
Bubbles, kind of a sound, kind of just a hum, you know what I mean? And like I took the sound of like sloshing waves and I cut out all the high frequencies. So it was just kind of like, like that sort of thing. It wasn't good. Like it wasn't great. It was my first time ever trying that, really, at least in that amount. And I just had this piece. I eventually finished it. It was like all of like whatever 10 minutes long, and I just had this piece, and I was like, what do I do with this? And I got this kind of like spammy seeming email from SoundCloud that was like, hey, we're doing fellowships. I was like, oh, this isn't a spam email. They're serious about this. They want to do fellowships.
What does a fellowship entail or mean?
Money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like not a lot of money even, but it was enough. I applied for it and I got it. And it was enough for me to, focus on that really full speed for about 6 months, which was enough for me to get the first. I am appalled by this, but I think in 6 months I put out like 15 episodes or something like that. which is so much for me. That's like a scale that I haven't ever hit again. But I had some audio saved up, and I was like feeling the mania of having my first ever success, which gave me a lot of energy. And I just blasted out these stories in like 6 months, you know?
Looking back on them, how do you feel the quality was, since you put out tons of quantity?
Oh, varied, definitely varied. A lot of failures in those tries. But, you know, I do think you get good at what you do. And I was doing a lot of doing right then. And it was necessary, you know? There's just no way to start doing something like that and be good at it out of the gate. And I had a lot going for me already because I had already focused on something in the arts. So I was able to transfer a lot of that knowledge over, and I was still making shit from the get-go. That's fine, you know?
Anything complex that we try that's a new endeavor, we're going to be atrocious at it. Not atrocious, but it's not going to be good. It's not going to be great
Yeah. It's going to be time consuming too, you know, because you don't know where all the buttons you need to push are.
Yeah, you don't have a process. You don't know. You're kind of making it up as you go along. But the good news is that once you make it up and if you write it out or think about your process, you can make it more efficient over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I was doing. I was figuring out that process, and having 6 months to do that was probably the defining thing that made the show possible, because otherwise I would have just kind of kept doing what I was doing and poking around and, you know, feeling sorry for myself instead of actually just going out and doing things.
After the fellowship ended, how did you continue making a living doing your podcast?
I went back to my job at the kite company, of course.
So nobody was paying you after the initial 6 months to make the show?
No, not at all. I mean, I did the show, I did the show for 3 years deep in the red, you know, not deep, you know, it wasn't like I was spending a ton of money on anything. I had a free SoundCloud membership that hosted the feed. I made a website that it ran off of like WordPress, and it was on a server I already owned, you know, so that was costing me all of whatever, like $50 a year or something, you know. I started the show with such low budget. I was using not even this recorder. This is my old recorder that I'm using here. I was using like a $150 recorder. These headphones, well, not these headphones, different headphones I already had. Software that was $80.
So very inexpensive endeavor.
Yeah. What
changed after 3 years? What was the breakthrough?
I thought the show was good. That's what changed. Yeah, I thought that it was good enough. I thought it was good enough that I could expect someone to pay me for it.
How did you pursue that expectation? How did you find somebody to pay you for the show?
Yeah, so I have a friend from college who I'd been sending my scripts to on occasion, and just being like, "Yo, Beth, can you look over this and tell me if it's any good?" And she would usually be like, "Yeah, you gotta fix some stuff in here, you know," or like I'd send her like rough drafts and be like, "Yo, Beth, like, what am I doing wrong here?" And I just sent Beth an email one day. I was like, "Hey, Beth, like, I think we could pitch this show, and I could pay you money to do these things and to do other things too, because I think that the show that, you know, now you and I are making is good enough to expect that kind of payment." And so we put together a big pitch packet. It was like, maybe, I don't know, it actually wasn't that big. It was maybe 8 pages or something like that. And mailed it out to a bunch of people, took a lot of phone calls, and eventually decided that KCRW would be the best fit for us.
Is there any regret about not doing that sooner? Or are you glad you waited?
I mean, regret only in the monetary sense. This isn't good business advice, what I'm saying right now, which is like, Well, maybe it is. I don't know. It's not conventional podcast wisdom. The conventional podcast wisdom right now is like make a really good pitch from the get-go, get money from the get-go, get a startup, like get started up and do all that funded, For me, that wasn't the right choice because I wasn't good at it. If I was making a new show now, I would absolutely ask for money from the get-go because I know what I'm doing now. But like I did 3 years of R&D and then I, have finally been able to turn a profit after those 3 years of R&D. It's just like those 3 years of R&D were, I got really good at making lentils,
Yeah, it was your education. It was you honing your craft and becoming, really great at it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still a lot of that. Like it's still a lot of research and experimentation and whatnot. It's just that that's not the majority of it. And I can, generally speaking, turn a piece into something interesting. A lot lower failure rate these days.
It's awesome, man. Do you currently have any large goals that you're pursuing?
Trying to make robots make the show for me so I can retire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to how they say like our world is going to be really struggling with automation and AI and those things, and it's like more and more jobs are going to succumb to AI, and then it's like whoever invented the AI for whatever field is going to be fantastically wealthy and everyone else is going to be fantastically poor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to do that for podcasts. I'm trying to become the automated podcast kingpin, like the evil Monopoly man, but just for podcasts.
What's funny about that? So I did a lot of research on automation at one point, and when automation first came to be, people's reaction was, in 100 years, we're just not going to have anything to do. We're going to have so much free time. There's going to be no work to be had anywhere. Right. And I look at my life and I could, if I wanted to, I could have work 24 hours a day. It's not a lack of work. There's plenty of work. And I think no matter what gets automated, there will be plenty of work for people to do.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually just talking with Beth about this kind of, which is that, the era in which we live in predicates the existence of this show, which is enough to support part of the income of two people, right? Because we both do other gigs too. If it had been 10 years ago, there's just no way it would happen. Like the fact that Gmail exists, the fact that Slack exists, eliminates a whole job of like someone else we would have had to hire previously. And there's two reads on that. One read is like that's one less job that someone has. And the other read on it is that's one more podcast that exists, right? Potato, I'm not sure.
Yeah. My podcast wouldn't be possible without being able to, if I had to write a letter to all of these people and wait for their responses, and then I guess I would have to travel to them. I mean,
right.
A lot of opportunities in life that everybody gets are possible because of automation, because of the advancements.
So you're throwing your hat in the like, this is good for the world ring?
Yes, I'm not super concerned with the self-checkout lines at the grocery store taking jobs, because I feel like there are more things for people to do. There's always work that people can find if they're willing to look.
You're not worried about the poker bots taking over your job?
I would say that poker bots are an existential fear for poker in general, because a friend was telling me that backgammon used to be really big in the day, high stakes backgammon, and those games died whenever a bot was made that could play backgammon better than any human on the planet. It's the same reason why there's no high stakes chess matches, because online, because you can get a bot that plays better than any human being. So
that is an existential event for online poker. The problem, the thing is, it hasn't really been done yet in a way that the bot can play better. It's a much more complex game than chess. But when that day comes, I think that's the day that online poker is effectively done.
Yeah. I mean, you're not worried though. Wait, why aren't you worried about the robots then taking your job?
I feel like there's opportunity in the world for people that look for it. So whenever an opportunity gets taken, you can find another opportunity. You just have to, you have to fail. You have to try. You have to deal with rejection. I think rejection is a skill that needs to be built up, especially in the world that we live in, because it's just something that is going to happen.
I mean, this is mostly a thought experiment, but when I say like I'm going to make automation a podcasting thing, right?
Right.
But it's not inconceivable to say that like you could have AI watching all the words someone is saying and deeply analyzing those, comparing those to 1,000 different outcomes of like Terry Gross interviews, and saying like which one of these questions did she ask that garnered the best response, and then crafting that with this and that sort of thing, and just like having you in the situation replaced by a robot that just asks the better question. It's like the perfect chess move. You know what I mean? That no human could actually conceivably think that many steps in advance, and then I'd be telling you about all the bodies under my floorboards and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's mostly said as a joke, but it's not that far out. Like it's not a computational power problem. It's just that no one's ever tried to apply it to podcasting.
So there is an existential threat to exactly what I'm doing right now. It's
like, how like some people draw like a bright line between humans and non-humans, right?
Right.
Like there's like humans and animals, right? I don't believe that's true. I believe that humans are a type of animal in the same ways that I believe that arts are, there's no bright line between arts and sciences. It's like there's gray area in between, and there's nothing that prevents robots from creating art unless you believe in soul. And you say a robot has no soul and therefore it cannot create art, which I think is a really tricky argument to make.
What would soul be? Would it be consciousness? What is your definition of soul?
I don't know if I have a good definition of soul. It's just that like when you see a painting, you very rarely see the person who painted it at the same time, who can say, I painted that painting, And there's like all these experiments people are running where they like just like hook up a bunch of mouse neurons to a paintbrush and like let it run and like control a motor, just kind of firing at random. It controls a motor and dabs paint all over the place. And it's like you look at that and you look at like a lot of the art that's in museums and it's indistinguishable. Like you could, I mean, not indistinguishable in that you can't tell the two apart, but like indistinguishable in the sense that like if you're just walking through the museum and you saw them next to each other, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's the mouse painting. That's the painting like a mouse and a machine made. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any sort of bright line between art and non-art. So therefore, I'm going to become the evil monopoly man who runs podcasting. The only problem is that I'm not smart, so I can't code very well.
The only problem is you don't have the qualifications to execute the endeavor.
Yeah. I don't think that the softer things are immune from automation. I just think that it's going to take longer. It's just a more difficult problem.
Do you think it would happen within our lifetimes?
Oh, I'm out of the world of making discrete predictions in that sense, because I kind of got my ass handed to me on a couple predictions here recently.
Well, I mean, it's hard. It's especially hard to predict these types of things.
Yeah. Talking to my friends who code, they think it's still a little ways out, but maybe they're just not the top tier, And
all it takes is one person, one team.
Yeah.
we live in a special time that is very unpredictable, a very different time than at any other time in human history.
You think?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Because
I'll take your word on it. I don't think that's a universally true thing.
Well, I would say from a technological sense and a growth and data standpoint, Dan Carlin talks about on Hardcore History where, some of the armies from from thousands of years ago could compete up to the invention of like gunpowder but an army from the 1940s now, it stands no chance against us today. And an army today in the next 50 years will probably not stand any chance against it. And just things are moving at a much more rapid fire pace as far as technological growth.
I'm reading about the Reformation right now. Well, pre-Reformation, just barely. Some messed up stuff happening in Germany back then. The printing press and Martin Luther were responsible for many deaths. I mean, not directly, but as a side effect of so many of the things that it brought out, And those wars that happened were incredibly deadly. I'm not sure. I mean, we have a lot of bad things happening in the world right now, Yeah, I guess what is information? What is information doing there? I don't really have any deep insight on that. I was always skeptical when someone says like this time right now, like this is unprecedented. Like we live in a special day. To me, it's a little too similar to the people who say like we're living in our end days. The second coming is right around the corner. That sort of thing. Because it's tempting to think of yourself as special.
It is. And you can reflect it and I think ask yourself if you're being honest with yourself. I guess it's a cognitive bias to think that we're special and we're living in a special time.
It might also be true. I'm not sure.
Right. But it could be true. Right.
Yeah.
And just with the advent of the internet and satellites and global communications, nuclear warfare, from that perspective, it seems like this is, if humanity lasts for another 500 or 1,000 years, this time of transition will be looked upon as something. It will be the age of something. Whether or not it's ultra special and memorable in that sense, I can't tell you, but it will be the age of technology, information, whatever it is they decide to label us.
I think the phrase you're looking for there is the golden age of podcasts.
Exactly, the golden age of podcasts.
Before podcasts were automated, that's what they'll call it.
Yeah, they'll look at us, two bumbling, stupid humans making their way through a podcast, and they'll be like, "Did people listen to this?" Like,
yeah, here's $1 million idea here, Brad. A podcast where robots interview robots. So you have like question bot interview answer bot. And it's like that person has like that person. See, I've done it already. That robot has like a database of every good podcast interview, like this one, for example. And, and it analyzes all of the brilliance. It like sorts things from like brilliant answers to like terrible answers. And then it takes only the brilliant ones and then like puts that in some sort of database. And then as it gets asked questions, it scans all of those connections and then it generates the perfect answer in response. And it would only be like a purely perfect podcast with the most perfect questions and most perfect answers, right?
Right. So
that's all people would listen to. That's what people will be listening to in the future.
Well, it would be like one episode of 60 minute, one perfect episode. And then people would be like, okay, I got everything that I ever needed out of a podcast. And now I don't have to listen to them again.
Right. I think this would be the appropriate time here, Brad, for us to both reveal that we are those robots. Well, as far as I can tell, this has been the perfect interview, right?
I'm with you. And don't tell my family, or especially my wife, because I think she would be a little disconcerted knowing she's married to a robot.
But she's also, married to a perfect person, perfect robot person.
Well, she was already aware of that. She's just gaining the awareness that I'm a robot. right?
Yeah.
Imagine there's a 20-year-old carbon copy of yourself listening to this interview. What wisdom would you like to impart on him or her?
Oh, that's an easy one, Brad. You've asked me an easy question here because it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it's something that I deeply believe, which is just the simple thing, which is that you get good at what you do. And I would tell myself to stop eating burritos in bed and start waking up early in the morning.
Awesome.
Get to the work before 4 p.m.
Make the work the priority.
Yeah, just do the things that I want. Do the things you want to get good at and do them a lot. And then you get good at them.
Are there any books that you reread every few years? And if so, which ones?
Oh, books that I reread. I wouldn't say that I reread a lot of books. What do I re-listen to? Oh God. I don't think I consume much media more than twice. Rarely more than once. And I don't do that on purpose. I don't know what that says about me, honestly. I don't actually know. I don't have any thoughts.
Okay.
On how to interpret that. I don't think I revisit things very often.
What's a project you're working on that's near and dear to your heart?
Something I'm actively working on. I have these fantasies about being good at woodworking. I'm not. I made a table for a plant a couple days ago that is going to fall over. It's so poorly made. But the fact that I keep going back to it and I keep trying to do it probably says something about something. It probably is related back to growing up in the country and my dad trying to get me to help him with projects in the shop and me just being really bad at it. Mm-hmm. I used to have to hold the lamp for him while he was working. Mm-hmm. And one time I just got bored and I dropped a little piece of snow on it and the light bulb exploded everywhere. And my dad was like, "You can go inside if you want." And I was like, "Thank you, I'm out of here." Well, there's some latent guilt about that. I want to finally show my dad that I can make things and fix things. I kind of neurotically, nervously buy tools. So I got a bunch of drill bits in the mail yesterday.
The solution to the plant not falling off the table and dying is, start your woodworking first thing in the morning, right?
I think
that's
so.
Your own advice.
Or I was thinking about maybe rebuilding it. It's going to be such a mess if it falls over. The legs are just wobbly all over the place.
Can I get a picture of the legs? I need a picture of this table to put on the show page.
Okay, I'll send you one.
All right. So have you ever strongly believed something in life only to reverse course later on? And if so, what led to that change of belief?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm amazed by people who say they have no regrets. That to me is a really wild mindset.
Define amazed.
Appalled. Think odd. I'm odd in the dictionary sense. I find that I am in awe of that, meaning that is a deep, powerful terror that I feel. Yeah. People who say they have no regrets, because maybe they don't, maybe they really don't. And maybe they have lived a life they're really proud of. I think sometimes what people mean when they say that is I don't think it's beneficial to look at the past and relitigate it. But I regret so many things because I've been wrong about so many things. I think I'm still probably wrong about a lot of things. I think that's really good. I mean, not to be wrong about a lot of things, but to recognize that my current beliefs are probably not always great,
Yeah.
And I'm in awe of people who don't think that way. Because to me, so much of my identity is based around, so much of my, way I think about myself is based around a questioning of whether the things I believe are right or wrong.
Me too.
You know, I can't live without. I think I'd hate myself if I thought I was right about everything.
I was 17 years old and I thought I was right about everything. And I'm very, but no, in seriousness, I'm distrustful of people who say they have no regret. I don't believe it. I don't believe that it's so foreign to me that I don't believe somebody could actually believe that.
Yeah. And that's why I think, it's not what people literally mean. It's just close to it, meaning like, I don't think I think it's the difference between I don't have regret and I don't think it's valuable to think about regrets. I disagree with both, but the second I can understand the first, I can't.
Yeah. If you could share one truth with the world, what truth would that be?
Any truth?
Or something that you believe to be true. Whether or not you believe it in 10 years from now is another question, but something that you believe to be true.
This is hard for me, Brad, because my job is, generally speaking, to make other people answer these kinds of questions, and I'm trying to be really cagey about it because here it is. Here's what I believe to be true. I believe that it's entirely possible to believe multiple things at once that seem contradictory, depending on the circumstances. And depending on how you go into a situation wanting to feel about it, right? I just moved to Providence and I really like it here because I moved here with the perception that people are really nice here because multiple people had told me this. And multiple people that I trust and I like told me that it's a really great city to live in. I think, in fact, of like all the dozens of people I told I was going to move here, only one person was like, I don't like that city. And everyone else was like weirdly positive about it. And so from the moment I moved here, I had a really positive feeling about it. And I have the perception here that people are really nice. Maybe it's because I'm smiling more to them, right? Maybe it isn't. And since a couple days after I moved here, like some kid got shot outside his high school and died, you know? A couple of people have died in car accidents. I've seen it in the news. Some other bad things have happened. And it's like, which of these worlds is true? I'm holding multiple truths about this city in my head at once, based off of who I want to please and how I came here already expecting to feel about it. We do this about all sorts of things. I think most people feel multiple ways about the same issue, depending on how it's framed and who they want to please.
Jeff, I love that answer. So I have to say too, that getting to know you and through this conversation, the previous question is the one that most people struggle with. But I knew when I asked this question about the truth, I just knew you were going to struggle. Like I could foresee the struggle in you with answering that question. But that is an amazing answer, and I love it. The final thing, where can my audience find you on the interwebs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Here Be Monsters. That's the show I make. It's everywhere. Any podcast app. Also our website, hbmpodcast.com. There's 101 episodes as of today, 102 coming out in the next couple of days. Yeah, it's everywhere. Again, the website, hbmpodcast.com, like Here Be Monsters podcast.com, or on any podcast app.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I enjoyed it immensely, getting to know you better, and I hope to keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate the conversation.
Next time on the Process Podcast, I have with me Donnie Bovine, the host of the Top 50 podcast, Donnie's Success Champions and Entrepreneur.
I did a ridiculous thing that I shouldn't have done. I sat down and started figuring out how much money I'd sold over the years and how much money those companies took home off of me versus what I got to take home. And holy cow, there was a massive gap. And I'm like, man,
do you remember the gap?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah, it was over $250 million.
Oh.
Don't forget to subscribe to the show or head to mentallyinvincible.com/theprocess because this is an episode you don't want to miss.